Hey class, so my guess is by day 3, you're not thinking e-learning is quite as cool as you hoped it would be, but I hope you're all hanging in there. Don't hesitate to reach out if you have questions or you're unsure of how to do something. Even if it's not math related, I can't teach you other content, but if you're not sure where to go, I can help point you in the right direction. I'm also thinking at this point, for all of you who think my videos should have an opening jingle, right? You think we need an opening song, it'd probably be a way more entertaining way to start it. So if you get bored, write me a song for my YouTube video. I'm not going to load it onto all of them, but maybe I'll put it at the top of my YouTube channel and people can listen to the video. So here we go. Next piece that we are doing today. So at this point, we should be able to solve quadratics by finding roots and by finding zeros. Okay, the next piece that we're going to add to the list is a third way to solve. And you're all going to be so thrilled to know the third way that we can solve quadratics is that we can solve by factoring. So that's the next topic we're going to look at. Okay, so solving with a square root only worked when we had x squared, but no x to the first power. Solving by finding roots or zeros only worked when we had some type of graphing calculator to graph for us. Solving by factoring is only going to work when it's factorable. I mean, right? That makes sense. So we can only do this when we can actually factor. And here's the thing. There are some types of problems that we factor that take longer than others. So while there are lots of times that we can solve by factoring, it's not going to be the best way to solve unless the factoring is easy. So the only problems that we're going to look at and talk about solving by factoring with are going to be ones that are easy to solve by factoring. Okay, so this is all based on one rule. And this one rule says that if A times B equals 0, then A has to equal 0 or B has to equal 0. Okay, you might kind of be like, okay, Mrs. McKinney, that seems kind of fancy. All this is really saying is that if we have two numbers multiplied together and they equal 0, then one of them has to be 0, right? 0 times anything is 0. It's the only number that has that rule, right? I can't say if it equals 4, right? Because then it could be 1 times 4, 4 times 1, 2 times 2. Okay, but 0 guarantees us that if one of these is 0, no matter what, our answer is going to be 0. And so that's what we're going to be looking at today. So if we have something that says x plus 6 times x plus 7 equals 0. Okay, so now we're just looking at something a little bit fancier. Do I have two things being multiplied together? And the answer is yes, right? I have a piece here and I have a piece here. It says x plus 6 as one piece times x plus 7 as my other piece, right? Those would both be factors. And so that then tells us that either the first one has to be 0 or the second one has to be 0, which means either x plus 6 has to equal 0 or x plus 7 has to equal 0. And now we're going to kind of think about these as two separate things, right? This is something that we know how to solve. So we'll solve this by subtracting 7 from each side. And we'll solve this one, right? We undo. This is just our basic equation rule. So if you're like, oh my gosh, what is she doing? Go back through my YouTube channel and find the videos over solving one-step equations, right? I'm just inverse operations and solving. And so just like we saw previously, this is going to give us two answers. X equals -6 or x equals -7, right? Because if I plug in an x value of -6, -6 plus 6 is 0, -6 plus 7 is 1, and 0 times 1 is 0. Right? If I plug in -7, -7 plus 6 is -1, and -7 plus 7 is 0, so -1 times 0 is 0. So those answers both work. Okay, so maybe we have something like 2y times y minus 8. Actually, let's make this a 2y minus 8 equals 0. Again, I have two things being multiplied. I have 2y, and that's being multiplied times a 2y minus 8. So we'll set that first factor equal to 0. And my second one equal to 0. And then I'm just going to go ahead and solve those both individually. So this first one, we're just undoing multiplication with division. Be careful on this one, guys. 0 divided by 2 is 0. Okay, over here we have a 2-step, so we'll undo subtraction with addition. We'll divide by 2. Y equals 4, and so we have two answers once again. Y equals 0, and y equals 4. And we could write these together. We'd probably just see an answer of like 0, 4, or something that maybe says 0 and 4. That's what we would see in multiple choice. Okay. The answers don't always have to be nice, neat, even answers. I mean, if I go to solve something, right, and I set it equal to 0, so maybe I have something that says 2y plus 7 equals 0, and I go to solve it, right? You guys know my rule here. Fractions are our friends. Here, even decimals are our friends, just don't round, right? It's okay to have -7/2. It's okay to have -3.5. So don't be afraid of those answers if you're solving and you get something that is a fraction, right? Fractions can be numbers too. Okay, but what happens if we don't have something where we see two things being multiplied? So what happens if I have x squared plus 7x plus 12 equals 0? Okay, so the first rule, if we see this, is that it has to equal 0. Right? That was the beginning statement that we said. If two numbers equal 0, right? It's all based on it equaling 0. So we're in luck. On this problem, it already equals 0, so there's nothing else we have to do. Okay, step 2, we're going to kind of ignore the equals 0 part because we already took care of that. And we are going to factor. So we're going to look at just this, and we're going to factor it, which means you now need to remember all of our factoring rules, right? Is there a GCF? Then we're counting the number of terms. So this has 1, 2, 3 terms. 3 terms we factor by multiplying A times C. So 1 times 12 is 12. We're going to then list our multiples of 12. So 1 times 12, 2 times 6, 3 times 4. Okay, and I want to find the set that will add up to 7. Okay, so 3 and 4 are my set that add up to 7. This has a 1 in front, so I can use the shortcut. So I can now represent this part that I circled in green as x plus 3 times x plus 4. And the equals 0 is just coming down along with it. Okay, and now this is really good news because now we do have two things being multiplied together that equals 0. And once we get those two things multiplied to equal 0, our third step is then to set them each equal to 0, right? And we can solve them individually. So x plus 3 equals 0, and x plus 4 equals 0. And I can solve both of those. And so I get an answer of x equals -3 and x equals -4. Okay, the key here is just making sure that we know our factoring rules and not forgetting all the different ways that we factor. Okay, so if I have something that says y squared minus 36 equals 0, right? This already equals 0, which is good. So then that y squared minus 36 we need to factor. There's no GCF. So then we'll count the number of terms. There's 2 terms. 2 terms we're checking for a special case. Okay, so what times itself gives us 36. Okay, and then we're taking half of the exponent. And so we would say this factors into a y plus 6 and a y minus 6. And now we can set both of those equal to 0 and solve those each individually. And so we'll get y equals negative 6 and y equals positive 6. And then some of my students will say, but Mrs. McKinney, can't I just do what you taught me yesterday and add that 36 to the other side, right? Can I just add that 36 and go to y squared equals 36 and then take the square root and say y equals a plus or minus 6, right? Which is the same thing as a 6 and a negative 6. Yes, right? This is the thing. We're starting to get in that territory where it's not like there's a right way. You just have to pick a way that's correct. So right now we're introducing solving by factoring, and we're going to talk about how to solve by factoring. But on a test, if you picked a different method, it would be totally fine. Okay, so we're going to look at one more here. So one more example. There's going to be a weird jump in the video. Sorry, guys. There was a loud noise and it's fine. So one more example with solving by factoring. So let's say we have something like 3y squared plus 9y equals 0. Okay, so the first thing we're asking ourselves is, does it equal 0? That answer is yes. Okay, so our second step is now start factoring. So when we start to factor, we ask ourselves, is there a GCF? And that answer to the question is yes, this does have a GCF. So we can factor out a GCF of 3y. So we factor that out, we'll get a 3y times a y plus 3, right? 3 divided by 3 is 1. 2 minus 1 is 1. 9 divided by 3 is 3, and then 1 minus 1 is 0. So those cancel out, and that equals 0 just comes down. So I have two things being multiplied together here. So I can say 3y equals 0, and I can say y plus 3 equals 0. And I'll solve these both individually. And I'll get answers of y equals 0 and y equals negative 3. So just like we've been doing with a routine, there's a Canvas check. You can take it up to 5 times. Guys, even if you get 100 the first time and you just want extra practice, it will give you different questions. So feel free to retake it and sort of do some more practice in there. But you have to take it at least once for attendance, and that grade will go in as a homework assignment. Reach out to me if you have any questions. We can set up a conference or whatever we need to answer any additional questions. Otherwise, have a great day, guys.